Hello, everyone. I'm going to just go ahead and make a start. First of all, hello to everyone. Welcome to American Muslim Today's speaker series, AM Talks, and a special interfaith event to explore different perspectives on the media and faith and how the media represents people of faith and just religion in general. My name is Rifat Malik. I am the editor of American Muslim Today, AMT. And before I introduce our wonderful panelists, I'm going to take this opportunity to say a few words about our platform. Our story is actually very relevant to the topic we're discussing today, the power of the media. So I'm just going to share my screen and just give you a little slideshow. This one? Yeah. Oh, just where? Okay, 1 second. We're nearly there. Hello. That? Yes. Okay. Share the screen. I'm going to get, here we are. This is it. Share. Okay. Yeah? Present. Present. Okay. All right. So I want to show you some images. Do I have to manually do this? Okay. So I'm just going to show you some images of Muslims that you will have seen time and time again in the media, in the mainstream media. And this will be Muslims as aggressors or terrorists. You'll see Muslims as victims, either of Islamophobia or acts of aggression. These are the kind of images that you will generally see day in, day out, whether it's in news coverage or whether it's in documentaries. These are generally the kind of images that we see. And the idea generally being that Muslim values and Muslim lives are antithetical to Western values. But what you won't see are images and constructs that represent Muslims, the real faces of Muslims, and the lives of approximately 25 million living in the West, and that includes 3.5 million here in the US. So we have to ask ourselves, for instance, why doesn't the media show how Islam is actually the most racially and ethnically diverse of all the main faith groups here in America, and a true reflection of a nation of immigrants? Why is this so worrying? Because studies show over 1/3 of Americans have never even met a Muslim. So they end up relying on these extreme polarizing stereotypes in formulating their impressions of who Muslims are. So how do we challenge this systemic ingrained issue? The only way to reflect the reality of millions of productive, contributing Muslim lives is for Muslims themselves to become stakeholders in the media, to become the gatekeepers of our own narrative. And that's exactly what American Muslim Today is all about. We're an inclusive, nonprofit digital news and lifestyle platform, which actually celebrates the immense achievements of Muslims in the West. Using our pioneering public service journalism, we promote groundbreaking stories across all multimedia platforms, informing and empowering new generations of diverse Muslim voices. AMT's goal is to be a defining force in inspiring the Muslim leaders of tomorrow. And to do this, we focus on the following areas. We look at leadership and political engagement. We collaborate with congressional and community leaders to champion political and electoral engagement. We also focus on women and youth empowerment. Our female-led platform actually counters stereotypes that Islam marginalizes Muslim women. We also mentor budding journalists through internships and are committed to developing the multimedia skills and media literacy of young Muslims especially in our youth section. And the other area that is extremely important is, of course, interfaith and coalition building. As this event shows, we welcome diverse voices within Islam and those of other beliefs through cross-community collaborations to explore commonalities and, we hope, promote religious tolerance. And all this is made possible by our extraordinary hardworking staff and volunteers who come from all backgrounds and ethnicities and include award-winning journalists and writers. So how can you contribute? How can you help? We hope that you will support our registered 501c3 nonprofit. Send us your stories, become a content writer, advertise, sponsor, or simply donate. And this is the AMT promise, that we hope that our platform, through collaborations like this, will start a powerful media revolution as we transform the image and perceptions of Muslims in America and beyond for generations to come. And that is the end of our little PowerPoint. So I want to get off the PowerPoint. Now to why we're all really here and what I hope is going to be a very interesting discussion. I'm really excited to introduce our three wonderful panelists. And we also have a couple of experts on some of the issues we're going to be touching on in our audience. And it will be great to have them come in on discussions. First, we have Jessica Wright. She is an associate pastor at the First United Methodist Church in the city of Allen in North Dallas. We also have Noor Sadi, who is the Muslim co-lead of Daughters of Abraham in the city of Dallas. She's also a writer and founder of Noor Arts, a Muslim publishing company. And finally, we have Sherry Allen, who is a cantor at Congregation Beth Shalom in Arlington. Now, welcome to you all. And I'd like to kick off by asking each of you to talk a little bit about your own personal faith journey and how it was impacted, if at all, by societal and media perceptions of the faith you chose to follow and the respective roles that you've adopted in your chosen religion. I'm going to start off with Jessica. So let me unmute you. There we go. Jessica, welcome. Would you like to start off?
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you so much for that introduction. So yes, my name is Jessica Wright, and a little bit about myself. I grew up in Central Arkansas. My mom is Jewish, and my dad was a fair weather Christian at best. His own pastor didn't show up to do his funeral service. Growing up in Central Arkansas, there were not many choices being a Jew. There was one temple, is in Little Rock. If you were not of the same socioeconomic bracket, my mom didn't feel like she fit in being a single mom. And so if you went to a sleepover on a Saturday night, when I was a kid, you would most likely end up going to church with that family on Sunday morning. My mom was fine with that. She said, she warned me against two things. She said, watch out, don't handle any snakes, and watch out for the churches that ask for money, which is something I still hear in my ear as a pastor today. So I would go with my best friend often to her church and wear the sticker that identified me as a visitor. And during the welcome one day, I shook my friend's hand and her mom's hand and her sister's hand. And then I turned to the other side of me. There was a big gentleman. Now I'm maybe like 7 or 8, but he looked huge. I remember how my hand disappeared in his hand when we shook. And he asked the question that most Americans at that time, probably most Arkansans at that time would have asked. He looked at me, my visitor sticker, and said, so where does your family go to church? And I didn't know any better. So I just said to him, oh, my family doesn't go to church. We're Jewish. And he looked at the child me and with utmost seriousness said, well, then your family's going to hell. And I can tell you that was my first glimpse of Christianity up close and personal. And I didn't go back to a church until I was in college. And a friend of mine kept inviting me to go to Wesley Foundation, which is a United Methodist campus ministry. And when my money got low and I kept hearing about this free meal that they offered every week, I decided to give it a try. And they offered a good meal and no judgment. That was my biggest prerequisite. Are they going to tell me I'm going to hell? Because if they are, I'm not going. So they went and it was amazing. I ended up having a crisis in my life while I was in college and realized that I can't handle everything. and just kind of recognized my own humanity in that moment, that I'm not supposed to be able to handle everything. God handles everything. And so it just confirmed my belief that there was God and that I'd found God while exploring Christianity, confirmed to me that I should keep pursuing that road. So I was baptized the next day. I graduated from college, married my high school sweetheart. We moved to Texas so he could pursue his graduate degrees. And I thought I was hot stuff with my bachelor's degree, thought I'd find a job, no problem. I did not. I was unemployed for months. I finally found an assembly line job and kept applying, finally got hired as a secretary at a United Methodist church. That was the first church I ended up joining, First United Methodist Church of Denton. I dove into Bible studies, I volunteered with the youth group, and I eventually felt called to ministry. It wasn't something I had ever thought was possible for me because I'd never seen female clergy before. I'd only seen middle-aged white guys who told people they were going to hell. And so I couldn't imagine that this was something I might be able to do. But at this church, there were multiple clergywomen. They were ministers of the gospel, they preached on Sunday, they administered sacraments, and they were still awesome mothers and wives and everything else that women are expected to do. So I pursued ordained ministry. It's not a simple thing in the United Methodist Church. It took me 7 years from the time I felt called to the time that I was considered a clergy person. That included earning a 4-year master's degree. And at this point, I've served a variety of churches in North Texas. I've been in military chaplaincy and campus ministry. As you heard, I'm currently at First United Methodist Church Allen. I lead our church's mission efforts and oversee our discipleship ministries. My husband and I will be married 19 years this May, and we have 2 elementary-aged boys at home. And I've got a lot to say about how I've seen Christianity in the media, but I think how media impacted me in my faith journey was Christians were always seen as Bible thumpers, super judgmental, hypocrites, and I couldn't believe when I became a Christian that I was one of them. And I wanted to do my best to be more authentic and to give a different voice to what I had always seen in the media.
Thank you, Jessica. That was really a wonderful insight into how you came to be where you are. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to go then now to Noor Sadi. So Noor, would you like to tell us a little bit about your faith journey?
Sure, thank you, Rifat. Salam, shalom, and peace to everyone. I'm an American convert to Islam for over 30 years, and I was born in the Midwest, and I started singing professionally when I was a young girl and continued on that path and became eventually a concert and opera singer in the New York area. And I was always interested in knowing other people. I grew up Christian in my hometown, but I was always interested in knowing other people. I knew the few Jewish kids in my community. My mother was great friends with an older Jewish woman who became like a grandmother to me. So at a very young age, I was kind of exposed to other faith groups, and I was happy for that. Interested in knowing people, and I always knew the foreign exchange students at school and so forth. So there's always an interest to knowing other people. And after many years, I got to New York City and had a wonderful time singing, and it was an amazing time of my life. I sort of saw religion more, not so much in the church itself, but out in nature, and certainly in music. Music was my religion and performing back in those days. And I was always asking God, to make my voice beautiful so people could understand the message that I was trying to share. And young singers that want to support their fledgling careers often do what we call church jobs or synagogue jobs. So I sang with all manner of different Christian organizations and Jewish Reformed synagogues and some conservative as well, where I had to. They kept telling me, just tell me you're Jewish. I said, I'm not. Tell me you're Jewish. I'm not, but we want you to sing, so just say you're Jewish. So I had this crazy experience. So I was, not only experiencing different kinds of worship, I was leading the worship in many cases. So you're really a great participant in those things. Even back in high school, I had sort of this interfaith experience where I didn't grow up in the Catholic Church, but in the 60s and 70s, the guitar mass folk group was very popular. So we all jumped ship from our churches. We went to sing at the Catholic Mass because that was cool. So we said, oh, wow, we were like 15 years old and already doing interfaith back then. And so anyway, I'm living in New York City, and I was kind of at the point where I'd experienced a lot of different religions, and a lot of my friends were dabbling with different ideologies and so forth. So I knew a lot about this Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, Buddhism, things like that. Had not a thing to know about Islam. And I was looking for a good coffee shop. I'm a big coffee maven, and I couldn't find one in a new neighborhood I moved into, and suddenly I saw a little tiny shop for coffee. Looked inside, there was a guy with a big dark beard, a lot of hair. I'm like, not sure about this. Let me look at the coffee. And I walked in, and he was from Egypt, and I was fascinated. Tell me about Pharaoh and pyramids and things like that. And we got to talking, and he said, oh, by the way, I'm a Muslim. And I said, I'm very ashamed to tell you, I don't know anything about your religion, so tell me. And based on what and I'll talk about this later, what I knew from Muslims through the media, through cartoons, through blockbuster movies and things like that, it was a very strange foreign religion, probably an Eastern religion, meaning plurality of gods. And he started telling me about this monotheism Islam and, part of the Abrahamic trilogy and the same prophets and familiar names I'd known from the Bible, Adam, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and finally Muhammad. And I kind of said, what? I was in my 30s and fairly well read and certainly traveled the world in my singing. It's like, how don't I know this, that Islam is a monotheistic religion and not some Eastern religion? Why don't I know this? Why doesn't anybody I know this? And who's been hiding this information all my life? So I was really hooked not only by the message of the Quran that I found so embracing of all the different religions I've been part of, as sort of a continuation and a final statement about those religions. And I was just mesmerized, and I loved it, and it seemed just very logical and beautiful for me, explaining religion and explaining history, that I shortly after that became a Muslim and sort of changed my lifestyle. So that kind of took me back to Wisconsin and staying with my mother, and there was a mosque in my hometown, which was unbelievable, in central Wisconsin. And I got active with them and started on my road, sort of closing the chapter of my musical career, but opening up another new beautiful chapter in a different part of life. So that's sort of my starting point and how I happen to be here today.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nora. Thank you so much. I am now going to go to Sherry. Sherry, would you like to tell us a little bit about your faith journey?
Yes, and it has been quite a journey, actually. I was not called to the cantorate or to become a clergy. I was more like nudged, like nudged a little along the way. I grew up in a very Jewish suburb of Chicago, Highland Park, Illinois, North Shore suburb of Chicago, and everyone I knew was Jewish. I mean, it was rare to see a Christmas tree around. In the stores they had Hanukkah decorations. So, that was all the schools closed on the high holy days. So, it was very easy to be Jewish. And, our family, we celebrated, the major holidays, but weren't really observant in terms of, following the Sabbath, observing Sabbath every week and some of the other holidays that really, we didn't keep kosher or anything like that. I didn't really know much about that at all. And I didn't have a bat mitzvah, which is basically the coming of age ceremony of all time for 13-year-old boys and 12-year-old girls, because I was the oldest, and in those days, it really wasn't as common for a girl to have a bat mitzvah. It wasn't until, so I think the little nudges that I got was first observing my brother, who's actually on this call today, Mark Bergson. Hello, brother. and being so blown away by that whole thing. And I felt like I really missed something. And so I kind of filed that away. He had his bar mitzvah. Then I went to college, and my roommate had never met a Jew before. I went to Indiana University. She was from a very small town in Indiana. And she was curious to know where my horns were. So I was like, oh boy, this, I'm not in Kansas anymore, Toto, but actually I am. So that was really an awakening, and I realized I had to really find out more. And it was only actually yesterday that I found out that Indiana University, I'm not sure if it was when I was there, but has one of the largest and most well-respected Jewish studies programs in the whole country. I did take some classes there. I wrote some papers. I learned a little bit more. I started, lighting Shabbat candles every week. I met my husband there, Richard, who is also on this call. Hello, Richard. And we started doing some of these practices together. It became more important to me. After we got married and we moved to California to pursue careers in the entertainment field, me as an actress and Richard as a writer, we needed some grounding. And we found it in a very small synagogue around the corner from our apartment, Adat Shalom. in West Los Angeles. And I realized it was a conservative congregation, and, you know, the delineations to Orthodox, conservative, reform, from, you know, most observant to, you know, to most liberal, I guess you could say. It was a conservative synagogue. The whole service was in Hebrew. I realized if I was going to get anything out of it, I needed to learn Hebrew. So I started a path to an adult bat mitzvah, which I had in 1987, and learned, you know, filled in all the blanks, realized that, oh, Shabbat is on Saturday. Oh, here's how you keep kosher. Oh, here's how you keep kosher for Passover. And I was really enthralled and fascinated by it, and just kept learning, and also became someone who led services and read Torah, which, again, a woman generally didn't do that much in those days either, at the synagogue, and became more and more involved as, you know, in a spiritual leader type role. And that took us we moved to Fort Worth when my husband got a job at TCU. We've been here for 28 years. And little by little, you know, we joined a synagogue. They asked me if I would, you know, teach the kids some songs for preschool, which led to starting a program for them, a Shabbat morning service for the grade school kids, to actually starting to teach bar bat mitzvah. Anyway, you get the point. It just kept snowballing until I decided I was going to go to this very intense program to be a lay leader and learn, again, fill in more blanks so that I was more competent to do those services. And eventually I decided, actually, probably the turning point for me was when a rabbi came to town who was not all that into to women participating or being in leadership roles, and said that since, you know, I wasn't a cantor officially, I really couldn't participate that much anymore in services. So I decided I'm going to be a cantor. And that's when I went to a program through the conservative movement called SICA, which was for people that had the experience of, you know, being in the cantorate, but really had never gotten the education and gotten the degree. So I became official in 2010, and now all these leaders, I've been 12 years in my congregation Beth Shalom in Arlington, Texas, a small but mighty Reformed congregation with some just wonderful people, and very happy there. And so that's my story. Again, just like I think Jessica was saying, or maybe even Nor, if you would ask me when I was a little kid what I was going to be when I grew up, this wouldn't even been a thought in my head. I didn't even know this existed for me either. I was going to be an actress. I was going to be a Broadway star. But I parlayed that love of actually being able to address people in a way that was much more meaningful to me, to be a cantor and a singer in my congregation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Sherry. And as Sherry mentioned, this is a family affair. She has her brother and her husband online, and we will be referring to them a little bit later on. They are experts on some of the topics we're going to cover. I'm now just going to go to the crux of our discussion. And what are the main ways in which the media, by which we mean news, film, television, multimedia, what are the main ways in which this has impacted society's perception of your faith? And let's start with Noor.
There, it's getting unmuted. Thanks, Rifat. You know, I was thinking about back to my childhood and how I was exposed to Muslims, and particularly Arabs, in cartoons and the sort of the big blockbuster movies. And the Arab Muslims were usually often portrayed as very sinister, evil, conniving, stealing, lying, whatever, all these horrible, unethical things, usually hook-nosed and swarthy and always after women and doing nefarious things and lascivious and always capturing women and putting them in a harem when they were, you know, scantily dressed. And I remember cartoons would show somebody making obeisance by saying salami, salami, baloney. And I had a coworker once who thought she was being clever, and she said that to me, and I was just kind of horrified at the time, you know, thinking that's funny, but I didn't think it was funny after I became Muslim. And, you know, a lot of the big blockbuster films when I was growing up, Lawrence of Arabia does not portray Muslims or Arabs very well. The Ten Commandments and so forth, it's kind of a typecasting. El Cid I remembered really well, and this is where I got the idea that Muslims are of like an Eastern religion of multi-purpose gods. in El Cid, they kept talking about the Moors, and they called them infidels and all these other names and this type of thing, unbelievers. And, you know, who are Moors exactly? We don't still quite understand who Moors were or are. And, you know, it was a very negative, bad impression that not to be trusted, you know, all the unethical things. And that was just as a small child, this is what I was imagining. And there's an interesting documentary out there called Real Bad Arabs, REEL, by Jack Shaheen. It's also a book where he really goes into a lot of what Hollywood has presented and how a lot of the Hollywood actors have to play terrorists and things like this. You very seldom see a positive sequence of Muslims anywhere. I was just recently watching a film with Tom Hanks, of all people, an older film, and it opens up with a beautiful shot of a Muslim man praying, and the sun is setting. It's over the desert, and you know he says "Salaam alaikum, Salaam alaikum," and turns around, has a big machine gun, and attacks the audience, you know, head on. It's like, oh, here we go, Allahu Akbar, and we're out to kill everybody. So there's so much that's there now. We're starting to see a few good signs. There was a cute little drama out of Canada, a little mosque on the prairie, that again showed comedy and humor to look at the Muslim situation and even things that we can laugh at ourselves. There's Rami out there who's kind of an X-rated Muslim, and I know the younger people say, oh, well, this is Muslims just like everybody else. But if we're trying to share our religion with people, as I am, that's certainly not the
What is it, deductible?
what we want to put forward. And we're starting to see some positive inclusions, like we're seeing Macy's and Gap show women in hijab and advertisements, and we even had a bikini-clad Muslim girl in Sports Illustrated, although she has since recanted that position. But we're starting to see Muslims more favorably in the media, and we know we're part of a capitalistic society, so we are people who spend money as well. So, but we're happy to see those things. You know, we rather be favorably shown in the media than unfavorably, and even if it's to make some money, that's still better off than we used to be. But it's been very difficult, especially to embrace this religion and love it so much and want to share what I've found with people when there's so much negativity coming across the airways. And there's a huge Islamophobia industry, a multi-million-dollar industry that's targeting the media. And just one such example was Pamela Geller, who went on a rant about butterball turkeys being halal and how this was so horrible for everybody, to the point where Butterball took off their halal standards on the turkey. So they have a lot of clout when it comes to this. They're very well funded, and they have a lot of programs that are, you know, again, if you don't know a Muslim, and the statistics say that even if you know one Muslim, whether they're part of your business or a colleague or a fellow student or a neighbor, your opinion about Muslims and Islam changes drastically. But there's still the majority of Americans that don't know anything about Muslims, and so all they learn about us is through the media, unfortunately, whether it's television or radio or the news or movies, whatever. We're grateful to the Turkish television station, which is starting to put out a lot of Muslims from their historical basis, that we're starting to see Muslims as heroes, that we know them living Muslim lives with prayer and fasting and the sense of justice and equality and mercy that Muslims have always shown in the world. So we're grateful that some of these things are coming across the airways. There's a really popular show on Netflix right now called Ertuğrul, which is about a semi-historical figure. It's a lot of drama, but a semi-historical figure that was the beginning of the Ottoman Empire. And we've even had people who have been converting to Islam by watching this. But it's very refreshing as a Muslim to finally see ourselves enacted in what we do every day. And again, with these properties of, instead of terrorism, it's mercy and justice and equality for people. And that we have always allowed other religious groups to worship as they choose to worship without pressure or persecution and so forth. That's my long rant. So there we go. I'll pass the buck to Sherry or
Wonderful.
Jessica now.
Thank you, Noor. Very, very insightful. Jessica, shall we go to you, please?
Thank you. So in representing Christians today, I first want to give the disclaimer that Christianity is just real broad. I was thinking about all my brothers and sisters in faith. Like, Christianity includes Amish and American evangelicals, Russian Greek and other Orthodox churches, Roman Catholic, and probably thousands of varieties of Protestant, just to think of a few. So it can be frustrating for Christians, like I'll speak for myself in this, when other Christians who understand the world in a very different way have a large, loud pulpit. I don't know if many of you are familiar with Robert Jeffers. He's the pastor at First Baptist Dallas. He's a well-known figure in North Texas and beyond. But he's got a large, loud pulpit, even though he doesn't speak for all Christians. That portrayal, that understanding of Christianity gets out there in powerful ways that it's hard for ordinary Christians to counteract. So we end up wearing that label with us. And I think a lot of folks tend to work in binary, regardless of the arena, whether it's political or ethical or religious. We like to create an us versus them, and that happens even within Christianity. It's great for the media because, you know, there's that old saying, if it bleeds, it leads, right? Like it gets clicks, it sells papers, if papers are still a thing. But that sort of binary understanding is not helpful if we're trying to have grace-filled, nuanced understanding of each other. I would also say that it seems like a lot of times journalists often assume that they understand Christianity simply because it's like in the well water. So it's more likely to be flattened and misunderstood. It seems like sometimes folks are more willing to take swipes at it, whereas I think nowadays, sometimes other religions are treated with a bit more research, a bit more nuance. Christianity just gets flattened out and set up in this binary system. So, for thousands of years, Christianity has held a position of power. Since the conversion of Constantine, Christianity shifted from being the persecuted religion of a few to the official religion of an empire. So anytime power becomes fused with politics, whether in the Roman Empire or the Church of England under Henry VIII or modern America, the media has countless opportunities to point out how people of faith are doing it wrong. Often a few loud voices who say they confess a faith become the standard, even if their theological beliefs are practically heresy. So I have found that Christians are portrayed in a couple of standard ways. One is the common stereotype of the Christian extremist, a Christian who holds radical religious viewpoints and who will go to extremes to assert them. These beliefs and behaviors are presented as dramatic, unusual, and excessive, almost always within a negative context. I don't know if many of you have seen the movie The Shawshank Redemption, one of my favorites, but you've got the warden who abuses prisoners in one breath and in the other offers the Bible, who has Bible verses cross-stitched on his wall, right? This is an example of Christianity associated with tyranny. He's portrayed as this radical Christian. Another stereotype we find a lot of Christians in the media is the fallen Christian, right? The one who tried so hard, they used to exhibit all the traditional Christian morals, but they lost these through some sort of temptation or sin. And very rarely do we allow these folks to be redeemed, right? Once you fall, you're canceled, you're shunned, you're considered an anathema. So this stereotype has the potential to generate a lot of drama and conflict, both of which probably boost media consumption, right? So a few years ago, there was a show called Glee. My husband picked it up first, and then I started watching it with him. There's a very popular character on that show called Quinn Fabray, and she was like the quintessential blonde hair, blue-eyed cheerleader, cross necklace, gonna be a virgin forever until she's married. Well, then she's not, and then she's pregnant, and then she loses everything, right? Because if you call yourself Christian and you don't live up to the values, you lose everything. There's no room for anything else there. So I would say those are the ways that I most often see Christianity portrayed in the media.
Thank you. And a lot of what you said really resonates with my sort of perceptions as well. Thank you so much. Sherry, shall we have your input, please?
Absolutely. And Rifat, please, cut me off if I go, over my allotted time, because I have a lot to say.
Don't worry. You'll see another side of me.
Okay, yeah, exactly. So I think that there's a difference between, news media, how Jews are portrayed in news media, and entertainment media. So I want to talk about news media first. And right now, there's such a surge in anti-Semitism over the last 4 years. And I think that the ultra-Orthodox community, the most stringent in terms of Jewish practice, and the Haredim, the Hasidic communities. They've come under intense scrutiny especially during this pandemic, because some have not, observed safety protocols. And that's what you see in the news all the time. And that's what everyone is harping on. It's really devastating, the coronavirus, the Israel's ultra-Orthodox communities. And they represent 12.6% of the population, with 28% of infections. So, this is a big problem. But, and parts of this ultra-Orthodox society have really rejected the mandate of the secular state and turned to their own leadership for guidance. So yes, there is a problem there, but it's not all Orthodox or all ultra-Orthodox Jews. It's just that those are the ones that we hear about in the media. And, there are many Orthodox, as well as, of course, secular Jews and Jews associated with more liberal streams of Judaism, that feel the violation of these protocols, huge weddings and funerals and all that, goes against the commandment to preserve life, which is pikuach nefesh. So there's a quote that I picked up in the New York Times of someone saying, for every ultra-Orthodox person attending a funeral or posting a subversive sign, there is another diligently staying at home. So I think, again, there has to, to be aware that, yes, this is a problem, but there needs to be, there are others that do not agree. I would say, in terms of television, movies, media, that kind of thing, you go back to Fiddler on the Roof. I don't know how many of you have seen it. If you haven't, please, after this, go find it on Netflix and watch it right away, because that was the third most successful movie musical of the 1970s. And it really portrayed the life that I imagine my grandparents were brought up in Russia. And it showed the richness of family and tradition, but also the challenge of keeping those traditions in a world that was changing. So it had a Jewish backdrop, but universal issues that everyone could relate to. And I think that's really the key of portraying, Jews or any faith, really successfully, is to show that commonness, that we all share those same values, even though we might believe differently. And again, Fiddler on the Roof is set against the looming threat of anti-Semitism that would eventually cause my grandparents to flee Russia, just like they did in Fiddler on the Roof. In TV, especially now, the ultra-Orthodox community really is not positively portrayed, because the strict observance of Jewish law is often seen as stifling. And there have been movies and TV shows, Unorthodox is one of them, centering around the desire of some of its members to escape, especially women. And I read also several books chronicling the real life stories of some of those who have gone off the derech, off the path, so to speak. And so it portrays Judaism, or really ultra-Orthodox Judaism, is very, very restrictive. And for some it is, but for some, is their way of life that they wouldn't trade for anything in the world. I think one of the big examples of this, and again, if you haven't watched this, please do, is called Shtisel. It's the exception, I think. It's about an ultra-Orthodox family, but the problems they encounter are universal. It's like if you were seeing an Orthodox soap opera, so to speak. Family conflict and parents and children who don't see eye to eye, and dating issues and confronting loss and finding fulfillment. They might eat or dress, learn, worship differently, but when it comes down to it, again, that common theme of we all care about the same things. So that is, I think, a really positive portrayal. When it comes to portraying non-Orthodox branches of Judaism, the more liberal Jews, I'm only speaking for myself and from my own experience, but I think TV really has a long way to go, because I think that's where most of the public also gets their perception of Jews. And before I talk about the stereotypes that I notice, why is it like that? What has, to me, I think, and I think my husband will agree with me, in the early 20th century, comedy writing was one of the few ways that Jews could work. That you talk about Catskill comedians and Yiddish theater. And so it was really a matter of survival, and they could make a living laughing at themselves, and others could laugh back too. And so many TV and film writers are Jewish, and the characters that they create often are born from their own life experience, like Neil Simon and Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, early Woody Allen. They've all created these iconic Jewish characters that many, especially those who really haven't had any personal relationship with other Jews, come to associate with typical Jewish behavior. And the problem is, many of these writers have grown up in culturally but not ritually observant Jewish homes, so their knowledge base only goes so far. So this is reflected in some of the stereotypes that you see on television. Jews are funny, we're very self-deprecating, a great sense of humor, successful career-wise sometimes, but also anxious and neurotic and guilt-ridden, OCD, totally obsessive about things, superficially and culturally Jewish, but not really ritually observant. There's a stereotype of the Jewish mother, that overbearing Jewish mother who makes you feel guilty about everything, the one who will say, do what you want, but if you want to find me, my head will be in the oven. That's the kind we're talking about. How important food is, this obsession with food, and that we're kind of outsiders trying to assimilate into, the regular world. Now, again, there is some kernel of truth in all of these things. I'm the first to admit that I'm totally OCD, somewhat neurotic, and I've been known to use the guilt card many times on my children. I think that's in our DNA. I think that anti-Semitism has caused us to be constantly on guard. But when that's all people see, that's the problem. And some of the examples I want to mention, going back to the 70s, Rhoda Morgenstern, the spin-off character from Mary Tyler Moore. She was Mary Tyler Moore's best friend in that show. She was likable, she was funny, but she was always worried about her weight, and she was neurotic about her relationships with men. Then there's a film called Goodbye Columbus, which some of you might have seen. Ally McGraw, who's not Jewish, plays a very spoiled, privileged Jewish girl who lived with her family in an upper-class Westchester suburb of New York. She belongs to a ritzy country club. She has family who talks over each other a lot at the dinner table while passing these plates of food, and she falls in love with this Jewish boy from the other side of the town. The other side is played by Richard Benjamin, who's very self-conscious around this kind of family. And of course, there's that iconic wedding scene, way over the top party at the end. Well, people are literally pushing over each other to get out of the way to get to the mountains of food on that sumptuous buffet. So again, enforcing that stereotype. Basically, any Woody Allen film that you would see, the nerdy hypochondriac, plagued with anxiety, self-deprecating, sense of humor, intellectual fetcher. He fetches. He complains a lot. In fact, one of the quote that I think really describes this best is when he says, and it's from Annie Hall, there's an old joke. Two elderly women are at a Catskills mountain resort, and one of them says, boy, the food of this place is really terrible. And the others say, yeah, I know, in such small portions. Well, that's generally how I feel about life. So, that kind of describes him. More recently, I don't know if we're going to have time to do it later, but there's a show called My Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, who main character Rebecca Bunch is a neurotic Jewish woman with mental health issues who quits her high-power lawyer job to follow her camp boyfriend Josh to West Covina and live a less stressful life. And there is, and again, I have a clip from this, but we'll see if we have time to show it. There is a bar mitzvah scene that's been widely talked about. And if we do get to see it, I'll tell you why it's at once funny and horrifying at the same time. The rabbi, played by Patti LuPone, who joyously dances with a group of people at the bar mitzvah, simultaneously cautioning them to remember that we suffered. So, we'll get to that later. But, I think remembering that suffering has been part of the Jewish narrative for so long, since the beginning of the Jewish narrative, really. But this song really turns that narrative on its head because it calls, and I think that's what Jewish humor does too in television. It calls it out. It assures that, yeah, we acknowledge it. It's part of our history, but we can also use a powerful Jewish weapon, wit, to rise above it. In other words, we refuse to be victimized by others, and we're going to control our own narrative. Thank you very much. And then, of course, the marvelous Mrs. Maisel. That's my last example. The title character here, Midge Maisel, is a privileged Jewish woman living on the Upper West Side in the 1950s and 60s, she's cute as a button. She's married to a nice Jewish boy. She has 2 children, a closet full of covet-worthy clothes, and the desire to be a stand-up comedian. Interestingly enough, Rachel Brosnahan, who plays that character, grew up in my hometown, Highland Park, Illinois. So she went to exactly the same schools that I went to, all the way through high school. So she's not Jewish herself, but she knows a lot about Jews. And the problem that I have with that show, and I do like that show because I think it's funny and I think it's, provocative and it's, it's very entertaining. But there are things that, the author the creator of the show, who is Jewish, said something in a quote, if, we're going to talk about these things. We're going to show a Jewish family being Jewish, right? We're going to show them a temple. We're going to talk about Yom Kippur. There are going to be people who are going to nitpick that maybe we didn't get things exactly right, but we all do it lovingly. Well, I disagree. I don't think, in my opinion, they're really not leaning heavily into Jewish practices here. And it's not that they just don't get the specifics right. They get a lot of stuff wrong. So it's not just nitpicking. It's, you know, showing the rabbi wearing a talit, a prayer shawl, at their wedding party, which would never be done. That's only worn in synagogue. The kosher butcher, not so kosher. She ends up doing her first stand-up comedy routine on what really was Erev Yom Kippur, the holiest day in the Jewish calendar. That would never happen. They attend Shabbat services once, and she bribes everyone with brisket. So, you know, these, again, stereotypes, but some things that, you know, that they want to show, if they're going to show someone being inherently Jewish or observing something, at least get the details right. They certainly have enough people on their staff, I'm sure, that are Jewish and who, you know, who could steer them.
You.
You know.
Thank you, Sherry. Wonderful. Thank you for your wonderful insight. I think we've all had, you know, really good idea of some of the background to the ways in which Jews are portrayed through that rundown. So very interesting. Thank you so much for that. I'm actually going to turn now to some of the questions that we've got in from our audience. And there's a question from Diane. And Diane is asking, are there TV shows that we feel portray Muslims realistically? I'm actually going to bring in, because I know that Noor actually touched on some of these, some shows. I'm actually going to bring in Mark Berkson for this. And Mark is a professor of world religions at Hamline University of Minnesota, and he's a good friend of American Muslim Today. So it would be really interesting to get your perspective, and then Noor, perhaps so we can come back and if you have something additional to say as well. So Mark, how do we unmute you first of all?
I am, okay, now I'm unmuted, am I? Yes, okay. Thank you. It's such a delight to be here, and I really appreciate the presenters and what they brought to this. I usually don't say this, but I wish I watched more TV. I don't actually, I mean, I watch some shows and some movies and things, but I do seek out shows that talk about Islam. I teach Islam, so, you know, and feature Muslim characters. And it's interesting to look at the impact that television will have on changing attitudes. And I definitely welcome, you know, others to talk about this, Sherry and Richard and others. I think about it, for example, with LGBT characters, you know, when I was growing up and sort of there, and I think it parallels in a sense, the treatment of Muslim characters sometimes, where the first time they begin to appear, they're always like side characters that are kind of one-dimensional and stereotyped in a certain way. And then over time, you actually get some richer three-dimensional characters. And when young people grow up with this, they become more accepting, because even if you're living in a community where you never actually meet a person like that, right? Whether it be a Muslim, a Jew, whoever, if you've seen it on TV, I mean, I don't watch this, but I know that there are people who watch MTV's Real World or things like that, and they're like, oh yeah, there's gay characters on there all the time. I completely accept and understand that, you know. I think it really has an impact. So in terms of Islam, for me, I'll just name a couple of things. Little Mosque on the Prairie, which was talked about, the Canadian show, it really was it was a nice attempt to bring a comedic sitcom vibe to it, where you both showed people leading ordinary lives and you put a humorous spin on it. But another thing I think is really valuable on shows is to show the diversity of the Muslim community in some way, that there's a range of ways to practice. There's more and less devout practicing Muslims. And to me, that's one of the biggest lessons to teach anyone when they study religion, that differences within religious traditions can be as great as, if not greater than, the differences among different religious traditions. So then after that show, you did have a very interesting reality show in America called All American Muslim. And I think people tend to think that most Muslim communities, large Muslim communities, are on the coasts. You know, a lot of immigrant communities come in on the coast, but some of the oldest, most well-established Muslim communities are in the Midwest, in Dearborn, Michigan, and Cedar Rapids, Iowa, right here in the Twin Cities where I live. And this show featured Muslims in Dearborn and showed the diversity, right? There were women who wore hijab, women who didn't. There were people who were very observant, people who were not, but they just had regular jobs. They were like a police officer, a teacher, a coach. So to me, they were trying, even though I'm not a big fan of reality TV, but they were trying to do it. What was very disturbing and I was talking about this with Rafat earlier, was a boycott was organized against the show on the grounds, partially, that they weren't showing Islamic terrorism on the show. And that should be as offensive to anyone as if like a show about Black Americans had to include a crack dealer or gang leader or something. Like they couldn't stand the idea they were just showing Muslims leading ordinary lives. But that wasn't the worst part of it. It wasn't that some right-wing group organized a boycott. It was that some advertisers caved to it and they pulled their support of the show. That was very disturbing. So that shows even the gentlest foray into portraying Muslims realistically created a backlash. Now, I do want to point out there are Muslim characters on a variety of shows. I was reading some of these. I don't even watch myself, but shows like Superstore, Counterpart, The Bold Type. There's a number of Muslim characters who have been praised for being three-dimensional characters on this show. But I just want to mention two other things before I finish. One of which is Rami. Somebody mentioned Rami on Hulu. I know that show can be racy, definitely, push boundaries. I think it's an absolutely remarkable show because, I mean, it's reaching young people. They understand his life and his struggles, but he truly is struggling to be a good Muslim and to live as an American with his friends. I mean, that's a powerful show. I really do respect what he's doing there. And I also want to say there's web shows like on YouTube and things featuring Muslims, like Who's Afraid of Ayman Ismail, which is on, I think it's on Slate or Salon. It's one of those two. And he goes and talks to people from a variety of different backgrounds who are ignorant of Islam or hostile to Islam. And he wins them over. He's very charming and very funny. And I think Muslim comedians, people like Asif Manvi and Hassan Minhaj, Dave Chappelle is a Muslim. They talk about their tradition and they disarm people, right? It's Slate. Yeah, thank you. So I really think comedy is a way to reach an audience. And there's a wonderful DVD. It's called Allah Made Me Funny, featuring 3 Muslims from different parts of the Muslim world, South Asia, the Middle East, and America. And it is wonderful. So just like Jewish comedians have used comedy and to teach people and to deal with the trauma in their lives, we see Muslim communities doing the same. So I'll just stop there for now.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you. That is, again, really, really interesting. I'm going to put this question to Noor. I mean, we're hearing all the way that Islam is targeted in so many ways by the media, and there are so many misrepresentations. And we have a question here, which is asking, why is Islam still such a phenomenally popular religion in terms of people converting to Islam or joining the faith? How do we explain that kind of contradiction? Somehow they're not getting that message, or what is it that is drawing so many people to Islam despite all this negativity?
I think like in my case where I didn't know about Islam, or people who had this very negative impression since 9/11 and everything else that goes on in the news. If people are exposed to Muslims, they find out that, well, this person's not a terrorist, they're not out to kill everyone, they're a very gentle, peace-loving, your neighbor, whatever, someone that you know, just like everybody else. And I think if people ever pick up the Quran to read it, or they meet a Muslim and start to ask about the religion, it's such a disconnect from what they keep hearing in the media. This is, again, was my question, like, why doesn't anybody know that I know about this religion? Why is it so hidden? Who's been hiding it? That type of thing. So, and we know there's been always a clash between, Christianity and Islam and things like that. And some of that just gets propelled into our generations too. And sometimes I have to fault what comes out of pulpits, whether it be in the synagogue or even, in the mosque or in the church. A lot of the negativity is coming from preachers, whatever their denomination might be. We look at somebody like Franklin Graham, the son of Billy Graham, the great televangelist, and he's calling Islam a wicked and evil religion, or not even a religion at all. So, these people carry a lot of weight. They have an immense following, and shame on them, because we know they know better. If they are a preacher, whatever, they've studied religion, they've gone into knowing about the world's religions, and to come across and say something so inherently incorrect about a religion just to keep your flock together or lead people away from embracing another way, or even just looking at another way of life, or even, I mean, the Quran is a very valuable book, whether you're Muslim or not, to read it. There's a lot of beautiful passages that are comforting and eye-opening and so forth. So I think when people actually start to get to know a Muslim or know about Islam, it's that jarring disconnect, like, this is not what I've been hearing. Why all the media focus on the negativity and the terrorists? And some of it's driven by a political agenda. Sometimes it's driven by a religious agenda. I mean, there's all sorts of agendas in the world. And I think that's what happens. It's not about people so much as it's about agendas. Somebody wants to, change something in the world or push their particular group, and then we look for the other always to victimize and demonize and so forth. And we've all had our share of that. I was always a little bit sympathetic toward minority groups, and now that I find myself in one, I'm more sympathetic to all, to our Jewish and Christian brothers and sisters, the LGBTQ community, because I see what happens to us in the media, that we are so disenfranchised and we don't get to see ourselves as we really are. And when you do come across some programs where this is very refreshing, this is exactly who we are. And as you mentioned with the Rami show, people are struggling. And I think Jessica mentioned too, that you're struggling with our faith, and you don't fall away completely from your faith just because you go off the path. I mean, God's very merciful. There's always the chance of forgiveness to come back. But again, they don't show that. You're either, with us or against us type of philosophy. So I think that's part of the problem. And I think interfaith is in a marvelous way, like what we're doing here today. I think this is a way forward, and we see it in our Daughters of Abraham and our other interfaith groups. We keep coming and saying we're so much more alike than different. And I think that interfaith is really a great way forward. And I'm really happy that we're presenting this today. Thank you so much to American Muslim Today for offering this. And hopefully we can do some more programs like this.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you for that. I want to bring in for a minute now Richard Allen. He is professor of film, TV, and digital media at Texas Christian University. I'd love to hear, Richard, from you on some of the comments from our panelists and some of the audience questions, and just your views on this topic in general.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Listening, of course, having taught media and I used to write for television. I could talk to you for hours about when I wrote for Days of Our Lives, we tried to have an Orthodox character on the show. And my only advice is don't try that. But the takeaway I'm getting at the moment that I think we all have to think about is that for the people I can see on the screen, and some of you as I can't see, but there's an age gap when we talk about the media and the influence of the media. When I was young, 60s, 70s, Sherry talked about Rhoda. There was, either you watched Rhoda or you watched Little House on the Prairie. There are only 2 or 3 things to watch. So something like Roots could come along and change people's perceptions of slavery. Shoah could come along, change their views of the Holocaust. And then even up to Will and Grace in the 90s could come and change people's views on LGBTQ issues. But now it's like going to a bookstore and looking at thousands of books you can choose from. And so I teach film and TV and have done so for many years. Every TV show that's been suggested or mentioned here is pretty much new to me. And I think every day I learn about 1 or 2 TV shows I've never heard of before that is somebody's absolute favorite must-see show. We don't have that shared media experience. So in fiction, shows come along and they don't have the impact, I think, in the same way. Quick story, there was this TV show when I was a kid called Bridget Loves Bernie. And it was about a very stereotypical Jewish family marrying into a very stereotypical Christian family. And it was a big hit. And Jewish organizations boycotted the show because they felt that it painted too positive a picture of interfaith marriages. And the show was taken off the air. The couple who played the parts were married. Since then, they not only got divorced, but she came out as lesbian. So goes to show you shouldn't be stereotyping anybody. But the point being that, whereas Bridget Loves Bernie would have affected everybody, now, unless the show hits the heights of a Mrs. Maisel, possibly, you can really go and have great shows that no one knows about. The media does not touch everybody in the same way. It touches us each in individual ways. And if there are positive images, people who are professors, people who are talking from the pulpit, or just talking to each other, you need to promote those positive shows. You need to tell people to seek out those shows and find shows that are on HBO Max. If you can figure out how to watch them, please call me, because I have not even figured out how to get that on my TV. But it's not as easy in some ways to find the many, many gems that are out there now. And the world is changing in ways that people over 30 don't even know. And people are putting out their own media, teenagers with TikTok. So I'm just saying, when we talk about the media, as the years go by, it's less generalized and something we have more power to control how we view it and what we view.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Richard. I think that's a very powerful insight into the power of the media and the changing media and social media and everything that kind of comes. There's been a real, obviously, a democratization of media. We all have access. We can all get something that's viral, or, you know, it's in the way that once upon a time that never happened. So there's no doubt this whole phenomena just it really needs to be properly understood and explored. I wanted to ask Jessica a question about, we talked about how Christianity, although it may not be the officially established religion, it is the prevailing kind of religion in many ways. And I just wondered, we talked offline a while ago about movies like Spotlight and how the impact of an issue, clearly a major issue within a faith, which is the sexual abuse scandal that has been pervasive within the Catholic Church. I wonder how much responsibility or fallback there is on Christians. You may not be Catholic, but nevertheless, you will hopefully be able to empathize with everyday Catholics in terms of how they feel when issues like that are, cinematized and widely published as being all pervasive.
Right. Well, and I think there's a horror, whatever group or organization you find yourself a part of, whenever a news story breaks, there's that, oh, is it us? Sensation, because I think it's very easy in a culture like ours to write off whole groups of people based on a single story, based on lots of stories. I mean, the Catholic Church has a lot to repent for. I think it makes it hard for practicing Catholics who are just ordinary folks who try to lead good moral lives. I think, like any institution that gains a lot of power, there's a lot of room for abuse. I think we've seen the same thing in Hollywood with a lot of the stories that broke with the Me Too movement of powerful people and players and organizations who are able to do horrific things to other people because they had the power to do so. Unfortunately, whether we're in a church or a mosque or a synagogue, we're all still people. And people can do some pretty horrific things sometimes. I think it makes it hard for the practicing Catholic. My Catholic friends will talk about the disconnect between their faith and their ordinary life. A lot of the Catholics I know, they would never convert. There's usually a strong internalized sense that if you leave the mother church, you leave salvation, that it's inextricably caught up in that one way of following Jesus. And I've had many volunteers in my Methodist churches who are fantastic. And I'd say, why have you never joined? They'd say, well, my mom's Catholic, and until she dies, like, I can't. I would break her heart. But there's a disconnect. So I have a really close friend who is Catholic and wanted to offer herself as a surrogate for a friend who was having trouble with conceiving. And so she went to talk to her priest about whether or not this was a thing that what the church's guidance is. And the priest said, for Catholics, it's left up to God whether you have children or not, right? We read in scripture about God opening and closing wombs. That's ancient people, how they understood fertility. And so if God wills that a couple not have children, then they don't have children, and we should not interfere with that. She went ahead and did it anyway because she's brave like that. But you can see where incidents like that cause a disconnect from the faith you profess and your own feeling and sense of what is good and right and brave and noble, and your own inner discernment of what God may be calling you to do in any particular moment. So I think it's hard. And I think it's hard when that becomes the prevailing understanding of a religion. I think in the same way, we were talking about the conflation of Muslims as terrorists, right? So thinking of Christians as sex predators. It gives all of us a black eye. We start, instead of starting at 0 in a relationship, we start in the negatives, and we have to work our way up to even 0 before we can hope to be respected or hope to have positive relationships. The same way that I thought of most Christians as hypocrites and worse when I was growing up, I think that just continues that storyline that people of faith don't always live up to their aspirational values.
Absolutely.
And it's not right. But at the same time, I think there's very little room in the storytelling that, the headline reads a certain way and very few people will go read the story, right? They see that headline about a priest, or they see that headline and that's all they decide to know. And that's all they decide to share. And that's the word that gets out there.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much for that answer, Jessica. Just to open it up just a little bit to any of our participants, audience members, we're hoping to sort of wind up in the next 10 minutes. So if you want to raise a hand or if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, I'm hoping that we will be able to manage that. So please do let us know if anyone wants to say anything or make a comment. Meanwhile, I'm going to go back to you, Mark, and again, just get, actually, before I get to you, Mark, I'm actually just going to ask Sherry something. And it was very interesting. It was, I just mentioned, and the reason why I think this debate is so important is it makes you realize that it's not just you. I think, as Noor will empathize with this, and any Muslims as well, I think Muslims have felt so targeted that we really kind of felt that it's just us who is singled out in this way. And even though, of course, we know about anti-Semitism, etc., and other forms of hate, when you actually hear other communities and other faith groups talk about what they're experiencing, that really makes it hit home. And I remember, Sherry, you wrote this article for American Muslim Today, and you just mentioned a concept that it's something that I'd always known about, and it was basically it was Christmas envy. That whole concept that you wrote about, and it's something that I had always felt, and I thought it was just me as a Muslim. I had no idea that any other faith group could also experience that same thing. That how do you deal with this powerful, very commercialized, after a bit, a holiday, and yet try to keep your own faith and try to, feel like whatever your holidays are, they're also important or make them special,
Yes. Well, what we do is we tell our kids, well, they have Christmas. That's one day of gifts. We have 8. We have 8. So, but again, it has become so overblown, the whole thing, because Hanukkah and Christmas are so close together, that I think that's one way we've dealt with it, is try to raise the bar on Hanukkah, but not, but that's not the point at all. Christmas is like a very religious holiday. Hanukkah is not. So it's really much just, you're not supposed to give all these gifts, maybe a few coins, on Hanukkah. But again, to be able to compete, I think that's one thing that we've done. Now you could even hang Hanukkah lights, so with dreidels, and stuff on your house. So that's one thing. And the other thing that we did with our kids too, we love going over to our Christian friend's house and helping them decorate their Christmas tree. We love being able to say, we're going to help them, participate in their rituals. That's not our rituals. That's not, our faith system, but we can certainly enjoy it with them. In fact, we have good friends who invited us over for Christmas dinner and made it a kosher Christmas dinner so we could eat it. Yeah. So I think it's a combination of those things. Really, again, saying, our holidays are special. I mean, not to go crazy like we do sometimes, but we have special holidays, but we can also honor other people's holidays too and not feel guilty about it.
Absolutely. Mark, I wanted to ask you as a professor who teaches religions to students obviously from different backgrounds and denominations, do you feel with the younger generations that there are the kind of barriers that exist perhaps for older community groups? Do you think they are more media literate, media savvy? Do you think they're able to navigate stereotypes better than perhaps other groups might be able to?
Oh, that is a really interesting and big question, because I think as with young people, and we've been talking about this with religious people too, you can't generalize because it depends on where they grow up. It depends on what kind of education they get. It depends on what kind of media they consume. And the other thing I wanted to also bring into this, we're talking about what we watch, media consumption, right? But it's also crucial we teach media literacy, right? How to be a critical, informed viewer of media, because so many attitudes are shaped by that, that if you don't have that awareness, if you're not, how do I know if what I'm watching is true? The old problem we used to have decades ago was finding information out there. How do you teach students to go do the research, go into archives, use the library? The problem now is the opposite. There's a bombardment, an overwhelming amount of information. How do you learn to navigate that? How do you learn to determine what is accurate and what is not? For me, this is why a liberal arts education that teaches critical thinking, open-mindedness, empathy, all of those things is absolutely essential. It's why I do what I do. But I will say something about the young, this generation now, is that one of the things that characterizes them in terms of religion is an interest in religion, a deep and growing spirituality, and a rejection of traditional institutionalized religion. All of those things go together. So what this means is the single largest growing group in America, religiously speaking, are people who are unaffiliated. They're called the nones, N-O-N-E-S, because they check the none box when they're asked what their affiliation is. People misidentify them, though. They think that they're all atheists and agnostics, but that's only a small percentage of that group. Most of them are spiritual. They just think that, well, religion's too politicized, it doesn't speak for me, no single denomination captures who I am. So they tend to find spirituality, and I think what one of the speakers was talking about, nature, maybe it was Noor, was it that? Music, friendship, books, all of those things, right, can be spiritual. So that's an opportunity, I think, for a religious organization to think, how do we reach this community? And the last thing I'm going to mention, because I want to leave you all with what I considered a piece of very good news with all the division and everything. And that is, a number of you, I know that Reverend Jessica Wright was talking about this, the encounter with exclusivism and the sense that other people saying, my religion is the only right one and you're going to hell if you don't believe in it, which is so disturbing to hear anytime. But when you're a 7-year-old, I was shocked anybody would say that. Here's the good news. In America, that view is declining significantly and has been for decades. So if you had asked Christians in America in the early 20th century, can people from other religions go to heaven and get into paradise? A tiny percentage would say yes, like maybe 4 or 5%, and 95% would say no. Now, in almost every, not quite, but almost every Christian denomination, people are more pluralistic. They believe that people from other traditions, denominations can be saved or go to heaven. Islam has, from the beginning, always had a pluralistic side to it. The Quran itself says not only Muslims, but also Jews and Christians and those who believe in God and do what God asks, those people can actually know their reward, right? But here's the key thing. Why has this change happened? Why have people become more pluralistic? Well, it's not because of the pastors or the ministers. And in fact, when some of them saw the data, their reaction was, well, we must not be doing our job, right? We must not be It happened not from the pulpit, but from the pews. And the reason it happened, this is what sociologists and demographers have established, increasing diversity. People's neighbors, friends, colleagues, and even family members are increasingly diverse. So most Americans have a member of their extended family or a close neighbor or friend of another religion, the vast majority of Americans. And the more diversity you encounter, the less exclusivistic and intolerant you tend to be. And that diversity extends to the media. So that for those who don't have diversity in their immediate circle, they get those encounters through media. So the more we give them that are responsible, thoughtful presentations, the more pluralistic and tolerant people become.
Absolutely wonderful. And I love what you're saying, Mark, because it's so hopeful. It is so positive, and there is so much to look forward to if that really is the trends that we're seeing. I want to wind up our program today and just to ask for some final sort of parting thoughts from our three panelists in particular, just for about a minute each. If you can just kind of like sum up, what you feel about this topic, and if you feel the sense of hope or an optimism that I definitely sensed from Mark. So Sherry, do you want to start?
Okay, here we go. I think again, what Mark said and what Richard said too about the amazing amount of choice. You're not just getting one perspective, one show, Bridget Loves Bernie, to depict, interfaith relationships. There's such a diversity of your choice out there that I think that actually kind of helps. You can get a perspective, so many different perspectives, and of course you have to call what you believe, but I think that's a good thing. And I think what Mark was saying also, was very true too. I mean, and I really do have my hopes pinned on the younger generation, my kids' generation, who have grown up with such diversity. And, we also, we were saying at the very beginning, I think the LGBTQ community, we have 3 kids who are all LGBTQ, gay, bisexual, and trans. And, when they talk to us or their friends or our family about it, it's like no big deal at all, and that would not have happened, when I was growing up, when I was younger. So I think the same kind of thing, in religion, there's so much diversity, and the more people are connected to other people of other faiths and other religions, or are exposed to, good, decent, honest portrayals of that, there's more hope for the future.
Wonderful. Thank you. Perfect. Jessica, over to you.
Thank you. So something I was thinking about as we were having this conversation is how important it is to speak love loud. No matter how big an audience we may have, we are all in one way or another influencers, whether it's, our small group of neighbors or our family or our friends. We all have this capability. We can also be content curators, right? What we choose to share in social media, the articles we share. My grandpa used to clip newspapers, and I would get thick packets in the mail of all the stuff he thought was important to read. And that was just his love language to me, right? Here's the news. When you get home, we're going to talk about these things. I needed to know the stuff. So I think just content sharing, right? During the pandemic, I don't know how many of you watched John Krasinski's Some Good News, because it could just seem like there's no good news out there, right? Like it's just all death and destruction and pain and hate, right? But there's always some good news. So I think being intentional content curators for ourselves and for others, looking for the good, sharing that love, speaking it out loud, refusing to be party to things, because I think, if there's anything that being a middle-aged white person has taught me over the past year or two is that silence is complicity, right? And we have to speak. We have to say when something's not okay, and when we can't tolerate that sort of hatred that's being put out there. I have this story of I got to meet, we did an intentional thing through my church of trying to get to know our neighbors more. And my piece of that was building relationship with the Islamic Association in our community. And so one of the things we continue to do to try to be in relationship with each other, because, hate doesn't live up close, is we work on mission projects together. We're doing meals for the homeless, right? So we're packing up pre-pandemic. We're all standing outside. We're packing these meals together. And one of my old white men, congregation members comes over and says, well, damn it, Jessica, God did it again. And I didn't know, what this grumpy man was talking about, but he talked about how every time he has had a bias against a particular group, God has worked in his life to show him the error of his ways. And so, it had been Mormons at one point. At this point now, it was Muslims. And he said, I just thought I knew, and I didn't like them. But it's always right to feed people. It's always right to feed the homeless. So here I am. And they're people, and they care about their community, and they care about their neighbor. And I can't continue in my bias knowing what I know now. So that's what I would say.
Wonderful, wonderful. Nora, your final thoughts?
I think if we can wrap our heads around the fact that it's about humanity, that there's all kinds of people in the world, and in every single nation, every group of people, every religion, there are extremists, and there are liberals, and there are conservatives. And that's just who we are as people. There's no one religion or group that is only extremists. It just doesn't work that way. We're all human beings. And one positive note is, for a while, the mosque was always targeted by these hate groups, and they come with their guns and they'd annoy everybody and stand there and make people fearful. But our neighbors and our interfaith communities would come and stand there for our Friday prayers or during the weekend for weekend schools, and they would lock arms and they would stand there. And after a while, these guys just gave up because the community was there and supporting us. So I think these types of programs and the fact that we're trying to get to know one another really makes a huge difference. And I'm very grateful to all the people that have supported us and the people who are here today. We used to go down to have Muslim Capital Day in Austin, and it was always a little bit touchy and a lot of protesters would be there. But 2 years ago, we went down and we were just surrounded by warmth, and we were welcomed, and people had t-shirts on supporting us. We couldn't even see the protesters. They were so far in the back. And we all just cried coming in. We were treated like celebrities coming in instead of like, demonized as we were before. So I can see the changes. In my 30 years as a Muslim, I can definitely see positive changes. So I think programs like this are really going to be instrumental in changing the focus for all of us,
Absolutely.
Inshallah, God willing.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Nora. And thank you to all of you, every single, especially our panelists, Mark and Richard as well, and every single audience member out there as well. You've taken time out of your Sunday here at American Muslim Today. We really appreciate that. I hope you share our vision and the vision of inclusivity, of bringing people together, sharing our commonalities to break down those barriers, which is the essence of our platform. And we would really appreciate, on a very practical level, if you would leave a Google review. You would just have to go to, is it AmericanMuslimToday.com? Is that where you have to go? Just Google. Oh, just Google. Yeah, just on Google, just leave a review. I'm a complete technophobe, so in one way, this is all an adventure for me. But I just really, again, just want to reiterate this event for us is very important. The media is such an important part of our lives. It's so pervasive in everything we do. We need to understand it, and we need to be able to navigate how it affects our lives and our relationships with each other. But the overwhelming message for that I felt that I'm left with today is a positivity and of constructive, building things together. So that couldn't be more wonderful. So thank you again, every single one of you. And we hope to have you all again on future events. For today, good afternoon. Thank you. End.